Ranger Allison Cortez had worked the Cascades for 9 seasons. She knew the sound of every bird that nested near Mirror Lake, and she could tell the age of old bear scat by how it dried in the sun. She also knew campers forgot things: hiking poles, stoves, even boots. But she had never found what she found on a cold Monday in late October. 2 tents stood in a perfect L shape on a high shelf above Mirror Lake. The lake below was flat as glass, reflecting pine, rock, and sky. Steam lifted off the surface in thin strings. From the ridge, the campsite looked normal, almost neat. Up close, it felt wrong. A small fire ring showed fresh ash. The coals were still warm under a crust of gray. A titanium pot sat on a rock, half full of noodle soup that had formed a skin. 2 mugs waited beside it, one lip stained with cocoa, the other with coffee. A first aid kit lay open, all items present and lined up like someone had been checking them off. A map was spread on a stump and held down by a multi-tool. A bright orange whistle sat on top of the map like a paperweight. "No people," Allison called out. "Hello, Ranger. Anyone here?" Her voice folded into the trees and disappeared. No answer. She checked hoof marks and boot prints the way she always did. There were clear prints from 3 different boot types around the tents, the fire ring and the food hang. The prints looked recent. The edges were crisp. Nothing showed heavy drag or panic. It looked like 3 people had moved calmly around camp, then nothing. She circled wider. 10 yards beyond the tents, the prints just ended. Not faded, not washed out. Ended, like a sentence that stopped without a period. She radioed the station. "Base, this is Cortez at Mirror Shelf. I've got an occupied site with no occupants. Fire still warm, food out. No sign of departure. Starting check." "Copy, Cortez," the duty officer replied. "Names?" "Not yet. I'll search tents." She opened the first tent flap. Inside were a blue sleeping bag, a headlamp, extra socks, a paperback with the spine broken at chapter 11, and a phone on airplane mode with 37% battery. The second tent held 2 bags, a packable chess set, and a small black voice recorder on top of a folded jacket. Allison lifted the recorder. It was one of those pocket models with a red rec button and a tiny screen. She pressed play. Static hissed. Then boot scuffs. Then a male voice. "Okay. Mirror Lake, 4:43 p.m. Test 1-2. A laugh. A second voice, female, farther back. "Don't narrate everything, Drew." A third voice, another female. "Let him. It'll be funny when we're old." The sound of a stove clicking. Lids, spoon clink. Wind in the trees. Allison set the recorder down and moved to the map. A route was highlighted from the trailhead to Mirror Lake. Then a dotted line continued past the lake to a place marked with a star. Overlook. Sunrise. In the margin, trip plan texted to mom plus bro. Back Tuesday noon. She checked the food hang. It was textbook. Dry bag, 12 feet up, 4 feet from the trunk. There was no sign of bears. No claw marks. No shredded trash. No rope cut. The knot was clean, like it had been tied by someone who watched all the right videos. Back at the tents, she pressed play again. The recorder picked up laughter, then quiet talk about sunrise photos and the bright band of Milky Way they'd seen an hour earlier. At 9:31 p.m., the voices lowered. The man said, "Hear that?" The first woman, "Wind?" The second, "No," like a A soft tone threaded through the pines. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a bird. It sounded like a wet finger around the rim of a crystal glass. It rose, held, and then dropped away. "Okay, weird," the man said. "Weirder, it's not on the lake." They laughed it off. "Zippers." Someone crawled into a bag. The recorder clicked. Silence. Allison bagged the device, took photos, then hiked to the overlook the map had marked. The dotted line matched a faint use trail that skirted the ridge. She found no new prints, just the same 3 sets, headed out, stepped clean and even. Then, again, ending mid-stride in a patch of dust like they'd been cut off by a blade. At the overlook, Mirror Lake lay below in a perfect oval, black and still. On the far shore, a small ledge reflected a dent of moonlight. Allison stood very still. The forest was quiet in that thick way that isn't peaceful. It was watchful. Her radio clicked. "Cortez, update. I've got names from gear tags," she said finally. "Andrew Wilder, 27, Sarah Kim, 26, Priya N, 27, last name scratched. Copy family numbers? In their permit file. I'm coming off the ridge. No night search. Too many drop-offs. I'll stage a team at first light. Roger." Allison shut her eyes and listened once more before leaving. The lake held a breath. Something low, far and smooth moved across the water and out into the trees. It was the same tone she had heard on the recording. Almost too faint to notice, except once you noticed it, you could not ignore it. She marked the GPS, flagged the route, and hiked back toward the trailhead with the recorder in her pack. The tone in her head and a tightness in her chest she could not name. That night, after the report, she replayed the recording at her kitchen table. She made a copy, then let the original run as she boiled pasta and stared at the wall. She expected it to end at the campsite chatter. It didn't. There was another file. It had a time code of 2:12 a.m. The first sound was a zipper. The second recording started with a whisper. "Hey, I can't sleep," a woman said. It was Priya. She sounded half amused, half annoyed. "Drew, you hear that?" The man mumbled. "Lake frogs." "Go to sleep. Frogs don't hum," Priya whispered. "Not like that." A third voice, Sarah, cut in. "It's closer now." The hum was louder in this file, thin and clear like a singing wire. It pulsed every few seconds. In between pulses, the forest held its breath. Even the needles on the branches seemed to stop touching. Zippers, footsteps in grass. Someone picked up the recorder. The sound went handheld. You could hear their jackets whisper. A headlamp clicked. The tiny mic clipped a blast of wind, then steadied. "Okay, this is so dumb," Drew whispered, trying to sound brave. "We're going to follow a weird tone into the trees at 2 a.m. If we become a dumb headline, tell my brother I want the Lego collection buried with me." "Shut up," Sarah said. But she laughed too, because people laugh when they're scared. They walked. The recorder counted breath and steps. Then they stopped. You could hear water below, a slow slick sound against stone. Someone, Priya, said, "It's not on the lake. It's above it." The hum rose, and a moth-like flutter layered beneath it as if hundreds of small wings brushed a hollow bowl. When the tone peaked, there was a very soft click. The kind a tongue makes against the roof of a mouth. Then the tone dropped again. A twig snapped. "Not theirs, hello?" Drew called, voice tight. Silence. "Hey," he said, louder, trying to sound like a big dog. Nothing answered. Not owl, not branch, not chipmunk. The mountain had put a finger to its lips. They whispered plans. "We mark the trail. We go 50 steps. We stop," Sarah said, calm, sensible. She tied a strip from a bandana onto a branch. The mic picked the small rip. 50 steps, stop." The tone rose. "Do you smell that?" Priya asked. On the recording, Allison could hear it, even though a recorder can't smell. She heard the sound that smell makes, a wetness in the back of the throat, a tight sound in the nose. Metallic. Sweet. Not blood. Not iron. Closer to water left too long in a copper pot. They climbed a small rib of rock. Gravel hissed under boots. The tone bent. It sounded more like a voice now. Not words. Just the shape of a word being formed by something that did not have a mouth. Another click. Closer. Allison paused the file. She looked at the clock. 12:11 a.m. She had been holding her breath, same as the forest. She stood and opened the window to let cold night air in. She pressed play again. "Lights off," Sarah whispered. "Just eyes." You could hear the elastic squeak as they tilted headlamps up on their hats. The recorder auto-adjusted to darkness, and the hum grew larger, like it had sensed the light go away. "What is that?" Drew said, voice now small. "Tree? Wind in a hollow?" Priya tried. Pretend ideas. Thin shields. Click. They reached the overlook Allison had visited. But the recording made it feel wrong. The lake carried back a faint echo of the tone, as if the water were a speaker and the shore a hand pressed against the cone. Sarah said, "I see. Wait. No, that's a reflection." "What reflection?" Drew said. Priya took a few steps. The mic carried the pebbly crunch. "It's us," she said. "But not us." Allison's skin prickled. "There is a way fear moves when it is not sudden, not burst and over. It is a slow elevator you can't stop. It sinks your insides an inch at a time." "What do you mean?" Drew asked. The recorder's tiny mic strained. "You could hear the circuits searching for the sound. On the water," Priya said. "3 shapes on the lake. Like shadows. They're standing where we're standing. But they're in the wrong place. They're closer to the lake than the ledge is." The tone swelled. The moth flutter thickened, wings on glass, hundreds, maybe thousands. The click became a tapping like a fingernail on a mirror. "Back to camp," Sarah said. Now, they turned. Steps quickened. The bandana marker flashed in someone's hand. The tone grew in their backs like a light. Tap, 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 tap. They reached the tent's zipper. They ducked in. You could hear them breathe, fast and shallow. The tone fell away. In the quiet, a new sound surfaced. The faintest whisper, too faint to decode, layered under the last echo of the tone, like radio static forming almost words. "Okay," Drew said. He tried to calm himself with a job. "We write this down. We stay put. Daylight, we go to the ranger station, tell this whole stupid story and let them laugh at us." No one laughed. The recorder clicked. The file ended. There was a third file. Time code 3:07 a.m. Allison did not want to press play. She pressed play at first. Camp noises. A sleeping bag shift. A long slow exhale through a nose. A fire pop outside, one ember collapsing into dust. Then the softest zip. Not from inside a tent. From the outside. Like a hand tested the zipper with a careful finger. "Priya?" Sarah whispered. No answer. "Drew?" She tried, voice thin. A shape brushed the tent wall. A careful hand flattened the nylon an inch from the recorder. You could hear the tiny rasp of skin on fabric. The hand slid down the wall slow. It stopped at the place where a person's shoulder would be if they were lying on their side. Tap, tap, tap. 3 taps. Then nothing. The zipper moved. Not opened. Just moved up an inch. Down an inch. Up 3. Down 2. Like a code tried by someone who did not know codes but loved patterns. Sarah whispered, smaller than a mouse. "Please go away." The tapping stopped. The tone came back, but not from the lake now. It was above, thin as a hair coming from the dark space over the trees, like a wire had been strung from star to star and plucked. The recorder cut out. Battery dead, file corrupted, or a finger-pressing stop. Allison didn't know. She sat with her hands flat on the table and felt the old wood cool her palms. She realized she had been listening with her jaw clenched. She forced it to loosen. At dawn, she met a 3-person team at the trailhead. They hiked at first light. They searched the shelf, the overlook, the far shore, and every ledge in between. They found no bodies, no packs dragged, no shredded fabric. They found, on a smooth rock near the overlook, 3 tiny circles scratched into a triangle. Each circle was the size of a dime. Each had a short line extending from it like a minute hand set to 12:07. And on a drift log at the lake's edge, they found 3 dry places where someone had sat side by side, feet toward the water, except there were no footprints on the damp sand leading to those seats. The log was clean of sand. The seats were dry. They were dry on a morning after a mist so heavy it beaded every blade of grass. By noon, the families had been called. Names confirmed. Voicemails left. A brother picked up on the second ring, voice groggy, then very awake. A mother went quiet and said, "I knew you'd call," which made something inside Allison press its own hand against its mouth. Search and rescue set up at the trailhead. Volunteers signed in. A K-9 team arrived from the county, then a second, then a third. Helicopters could not fly low in the afternoon gusts, but the chopper pilot took wide passes and saw nothing that helped. At 2:40 p.m., A handler called out, "Alert!" The dog, a dark shepherd named Tova, had found scent along a faint goat track below the overlook. The track tilted across a steep slope where loose rock slid like ball bearings under boots. Allison tied in a safety line and followed. The dog pulled, stopped, then whined and backed up as if she'd reached a wall. There was no wall. There was air, rock, and pine. But the dog would not go forward. She turned away, tail tucked, and looked at her handler like, "Please don't make me." Allison looked at the rock. A fine powder covered it like dust from a chalkboard. There was one straight line drawn through the dust. It ended exactly at the edge. Not over it, to it. The line was the width of a finger. By the second day, the story hit regional news. 3 young campers missing at Mirror Lake. The video showed smiling photos, a graduation cap, a summit pose, a kitchen selfie. The comments arrived as they always did. They weren't prepared, they did drugs, they ran away, they staged it for clicks. Allison turned off the TV in the station break room and went back to the map. She found the recorder's SD card in her pocket, then stopped herself. No. Evidence stayed evidence. She logged it, signed it back out at the lab, and sat with a tech while they pulled the raw files and the metadata. "Look at the noise floor here," the tech said, pointing to a fuzzy gray line that ran under the campsite file. "Forest hiss normal. But here?" He slid to the night file. A new band appeared in the spectrogram, a thin white filament that rose, fell, and rose again, regular as a heartbeat. "That's your hum. What frequency?" Allison asked. "Varies between 412 and 418 hertz," he said. "But look at this. It's modulating against something lower." He zoomed out. A darker band under the hum appeared, so low it was almost a block. "That fundamental is, wow, like subhuman. 22 hertz. You don't hear that so much as feel it." "Infrasound," Allison said. "Yeah. Wind through a cave mouth can do that," the tech said. "Also big engines, storms, earthquakes, whales. It shakes the body, messes with balance, can make people see things at the edges." He glanced at her. "But there's no cave on your topo." "No cave," Allison said. "No engines. No whales in the Cascades." He gave a small helpless shrug. "Then it's wind finding a shape. Or it's something we don't map." On day 3, a college kid who'd been following the case online hiked up against advice. He posted a shaky video at dusk, breath fogging. "I'm at the Mirror Lake overlook, listen." You could hear wind. You could hear his nervous laugh. Then very faint you could hear the tone. The clip blew up. The sheriff closed the area and set a citation station at the trailhead. That night Allison went home, showered mud from her legs, and stood in her dark living room looking at nothing. She is not superstitious. She does not tell ghost stories on patrol. She knows the math. People wander, people fall, people hide. But she also knows mountain weather creates rarities. Sounds bent by cold layers, light tricked by inversion, bodies taken by water that looks still and is not. She pressed play on the 3rd file again. The soft zip, the careful hand on nylon, the taps. She turned the volume up and listened not to the taps but to what lived between them. Not static, not breath. It sounded like words almost happening. On day 4, a man called in a tip from a cabin 2 miles down the drainage. He said he'd been on his porch the night the campers vanished. He couldn't sleep. He'd heard a high, thin sound drift down the slope around 2 in the morning. Like someone running a wet finger around a wine glass, he said, apologizing for how crazy he knew that sounded. "It wasn't wind." "Wind, I know. Anything else?" Allison asked. "Yeah," he said after a long pause. "It had layers like a choir. Not human, but together. My old dog got up, stared uphill, and growled like he does at thunder." On day 5, they found a phone. It lay face down on a flat rock near the lake's far shore, just above the waterline. No prints in the damp sand. No blow-in debris to explain it. The back was scratched, as if it had been slid across stone by a careful hand. The battery was dead. The techs revived it. One video sat in the buffer, unsent, auto-saved, 1 minute and 14 seconds long. In the clip, you could see the lake at night. The stars were bright, reflected. Someone whispered, "Okay, testing night mode." The camera shook. It steadied. On the water, 3 dark shapes stood like people standing ankle deep. They weren't in the right place, not physically. The camera showed the ledge in front of the person filming, and yet the shapes stood in the lake where no person could stand. Their heads were tilted like they were listening to a far sound. The hum rose in the mic. The shapes leaned toward the camera, toward the shore, toward whoever held the phone. "Guys," the filmer whispered, a ribbon of fear in his voice. The shapes lifted their hands slowly, like they were going to wave, or like they were going to touch a glass from the other side. The clip ended at the soft sound of a zipper. News crews asked for a statement. The sheriff stuck to facts. 3 missing. No foul play found. Search ongoing. Trails closed. He did not mention the hum. He did not mention the video, the SD card, or the 3 dry seats. He did not mention the little triangle scratched in dust, or the way dogs reached the same invisible wall and refused to cross. A week later, the families held a vigil at the trailhead. They sang, they cried. They set 3 little lanterns into the creek that becomes the lake, and watched them drift around a bend and out of sight. Allison didn't go to the vigil. She was at the overlook at sunset alone, because sometimes the only way to stand a thing is to face the exact spot where it happened. She sat on the stone and looked down at a lake that mirrored sky and made 2 worlds, one above, one below. So perfectly alike it was hard to say which was the real one. As the light faded, the mountain cooled. Air slipped off the ridge like cold water and pooled in the bowl. The trees stopped their little talk. For a long minute there was no wind and no bird and no human, and into that perfect space the tone rose again, so soft that if she'd coughed she would have missed it. It climbed to a place her ears could barely follow, hovered and fell. Allison did what you are not supposed to do when you are trained, seasoned, and in uniform. She spoke to a thing she could not name. "If you have them," she said, voice steady, "let them go. If they walked into the wrong world, show them the door back. If they drowned in air or stepped into water that wasn't water, put them somewhere a mother can hold something. I'm asking." The mountain did not answer in words, but the tone dropped lower to a note you do not hear so much as feel. It shivered her ribs. It smoothed the hair on her arms. It pressed tears into her eyes she had not planned to have. Under that note, she heard something else, the smallest scrape. Like a fingertip on glass, tap, 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 3 taps. She stood and stepped back from the edge. The taps stopped. The tone thinned and went away. In the years since, Mirror Lake has a reputation that rangers don't post on signs. People still camp there. Most have a beautiful time. Some hear a high, thin hum at night and feel a press in their chest like a deep train passing under the earth. A few see shapes on the lake that move when they move, but not as reflections should. They pack up at dawn and hike out fast, embarrassed to have been scared by water and wind. No more bodies have been found. No gear has surfaced. The voice recorder sealed in evidence still holds 3 files. The spectrograms still show bands no wind map can explain. The little triangle scratched into dust faded with the first hard rain. When Allison hikes the shelf now, she stops at the place where 3 sets of prints end mid-stride. She looks at nothing at all and says, "I know." She is not sure what she knows, only that some places are mirrors, and some nights if you hum the right note, the mirror hums back. And if you press your hand to that glass long enough, something on the other side might press its hand to yours and tap, 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 like it has been waiting for you to match its rhythm. My name's Evan Malone. I've driven logging routes through Oregon for 15 years. I've seen fog thick as milk, elk in the middle of the highway, and rock slides that appear out of nowhere. But nothing messed with me like what I saw near Clatsop Ridge 2 winters ago. It was February, almost midnight, cold enough to freeze windshield fluid. I was heading back from a delivery run to Astoria, just trying to shave an hour by taking the old Barlow service road. It's not on most maps anymore, closed after a washout, but every local trucker knows you can still squeeze through. There's one long ravine in that stretch, about 40 feet deep. A steel bridge used to cross it. It collapsed years ago. There are road closed signs, but I swear I'd crossed a detour gravel path a dozen times before. That night, though, it looked different. As I came around the bend, I saw it. The bridge. Back again, it looked brand new. Silver beams wet with fog, railings gleaming like oil. The yellow reflectors along the edge glowed faintly in my headlights. I slowed down, trying to remember if the county had rebuilt it. I radioed dispatch just to be safe. Static. Not unusual in those hills. I inched forward until my tires were halfway onto the bridge. The metal clanged under me, solid, not hollow. The river below was nothing but darkness. Halfway across, my radio came alive for half a second. "You shouldn't..." Then it died again. I stopped. The whole truck hummed, like the bridge itself was vibrating, faint but steady, in tune with the engine. I cut the ignition. The sound didn't stop. Outside, the fog glowed a little, bluish-white. It didn't roll like normal fog. It held shape like I was inside a glowing tunnel. And that's when I saw someone ahead, a man, standing dead center in the lane. He wore a high-vis jacket like a road worker with reflective tape catching my headlights. But there was something wrong with how he stood. Too straight, like his joints didn't bend. His head tilted once, slow. I flashed my brights. "You good?" I shouted through the window. No answer. Then his jacket flickered, literally flickered, like light bouncing off water, and I realized I could see the railing through him. I threw the truck in reverse, but before I could move, the whole bridge shuddered. The metal under me screamed. I slammed the gear shift, floored it backward, tires smoking, engine roaring. As my headlights hit the far end of the bridge, I saw the "road closed" sign again. Except this time, the bridge wasn't there. Just open air and the ravine yawning below. My rear tires hit gravel so hard the truck fishtailed. I stopped 20 feet back, gasping, staring into the fog where the bridge had been seconds earlier. Nothing. Just darkness and the echo of rushing water. That's how it started. The sheriff's office didn't take long to send a deputy after I reported it. By dawn, they were at the site. 2 cruisers with spotlights, a tow team just in case. They found my tire marks clear as day, stopping right at the ravine's edge. But no bridge. "Mr. Malone," the deputy said, "you sure it wasn't fog reflection? Happens all the time up here." "Fog doesn't leave steel scrape marks," I said, because there were 2 on the cliff edge. Fresh parallel gouges in the rock, like heavy tires had pressed onto something solid and it had bent before disappearing. He didn't answer that, just wrote it down and told me they'd follow up. They never did. A week later, I went to the diner in town, small place off Route 6 where every logger, ranger, and trucker grabs coffee at 5 a.m. I told my story. Half the room laughed, half just looked at me like they'd heard it before. An old guy at the counter turned his cup slow and said, "You saw the midnight span." I asked what that meant. He shrugged. "My father called it that. Bridge shows up sometimes in fog. Miners saw it back in the 40s. Folks say it's the county's way of collecting the ones who took shortcuts." "Collecting?" He nodded. "Road crew died building it, 7 men. Fell into the ravine when the western beam snapped. County said cables failed. Locals said someone cut them. Either way, they never found all the bodies." He took a sip. "Sometimes people still see their lanterns swinging under the fog." A few seats away, a younger guy chimed in. "My uncle swore he drove over it in '98. Said he saw taillights ahead that weren't his. Followed them straight across. When he looked back, nothing there. I wanted to laugh it off, but part of me didn't. That night, I dug into old records, county archives, newspaper scans, whatever I could find online. He wasn't lying. There really had been an accident in 1948. 7 workers lost in Clatsop Bridge collapse. The last line of the article said, Officials ceased recovery operations after 3 days due to unstable structure. Search teams report hearing intermittent knocking from beneath the remaining girders. Knocking. From under a bridge that had already fallen, I stopped reading. I didn't sleep that night. 3 weeks later, I started hearing something strange on my CB radio. Late at night around the same stretch of road. A low hum that came through even when I switched channels. At first I thought it was interference, engine noise, bad reception, something. Then I started hearing words underneath. Cross, cross, then silence. I turned the radio off after that. But the next night at the same hour it came back. Cross, the span. That was the first night I dreamed of headlights hanging in fog, motionless, floating mid-air above black water. I told myself I wouldn't go back. But curiosity is poison. 2 months later, I took a different route. Night run, same cargo, just happened to pass by the service road again. I told myself it was for closure, just to prove it wasn't real. The fog came down thick that night like someone poured milk over the mountains. The temperature dropped fast, breath fogging in front of my face even inside the cab. I slowed down near the ravine. The sign still said road closed. The metal barrier was still chained across. Then, right as my headlights hit the edge, I saw it again, steel beams, railings, bolts gleaming wet, stretching across the black gap like it had never fallen. And I wasn't the only one. Headlights appeared on the other side, facing me. A small truck, maybe white or gray, I couldn't tell through the fog. The driver flashed his lights twice, like asking if I'd cross first. I didn't move. I rolled down the window, shouted, "You seeing this?" No answer. The other driver just sat there, engine idling. Then his truck started rolling forward. He crossed halfway, and I swear to God I could see him plain as day. Middle-aged guy, flannel shirt, both hands on the wheel. He gave me a small wave, then the lights blinked once and went out. The sound of metal hitting metal cracked through the fog. A splash echoed from below. I jumped out of the cab, ran to the barrier, flashlight shaking in my hand. No bridge. No lights, just the ravine. My beam caught something glinting near the water far below. A piece of chrome bobbing once, then sinking. By morning, rescue crews were there again. They found nothing. No truck, no tire marks from the other side, no trace of a second vehicle at all. They searched the ravine for 3 days before declaring it unsubstantiated. I don't drive that route anymore. Neither do most of the locals, but every so often, new guys on night hauls mention seeing strange reflections near the closed section. And one ranger told me something last year that made my stomach twist. He said after a heavy rain, the creek below rises high enough to wash small debris onto the rocks. Last spring they found an old license plate wedged between stones. It was from 1948, the year the bridge collapsed. The letters were rusted away except for 3. S.P.A. The same letters I'd heard on the radio. Sometimes when I'm driving long routes in the dark, I still think about that night. How the fog lit up from inside, how the bridge sounded alive, how that man's jacket flickered like it was never really there. And when the highway gets too quiet, no music, no chatter, just the hum of tires, I swear I hear it again in the static of my CB cross the span, but I don't answer anymore. Because now I know what's waiting on the other side. My name's Riley Ward. I used to work seasonal trail maintenance up near Glacier Valley, Washington, just north of Marble Mount, where the forests start swallowing radio signals and time seems to run slower. Every spring, my crew would clear the backcountry trails, fallen logs, avalanche debris, snowmelt damage, the usual. The mountains there are quiet in a way that's not peaceful. It's a silence that presses down on you like the woods are listening. In 2021, I was assigned to a section called the West Loop Spur, a lesser-used trail that ran 7 miles up to a narrow valley floor and ended near the ruins of an old ranger station. It had been abandoned in the 1970s after a mudslide blocked vehicle access. Or at least, that's what I'd been told. We were 3 people on that assignment: me, another seasonal worker named Jonah, and our field supervisor, Dana. The plan was simple: clear brush, inspect bridges, and confirm that the old station ruins hadn't collapsed further. The first 2 days were uneventful. Cold mornings, wet boots, and the smell of cedar. The only strange thing we noticed was that the valley was oddly quiet. No birds, no chipmunks, no wind once we got deep enough. Even Dana said, "It feels like walking inside a paused video." On the 3rd day, while marking tree blazes, Jonah spotted something odd off-trail. A wooden roof, half buried under snowmelt and moss. We followed him down a slope about 30 yards. It wasn't a ruin. It was a cabin, small, intact, and clearly not listed on any of our maps. The logs were old but solid. A metal chimney leaned slightly and the windows were dusty but unbroken. No footprints around it, no sign of recent use. The door was latched with a strip of rusted wire. "Must be from before the slides," Dana said. "Or a trapper's place." We didn't want to break in, but we needed to log coordinates. So she told Jonah to take exterior photos for the report while I circled to check for sinkholes or hazards. That's when I saw something that made my stomach clench. Behind the cabin, nailed to a tree, was an old wooden sign, split and half faded. The letters were still readable: "Property of Glacier Station, do not enter." But below it, someone had carved something newer with a knife. "They live in the pictures." I called Dana over. She stared at it for a long time, frowning. "Locals," she said finally, like that explained everything. She photographed the sign anyway. Jonah was still snapping pictures around the front when he called out, "Hey, someone left a camera inside." We stepped closer. Through the cabin window you could see a table and an old Polaroid camera sitting right in the middle. A few photos were scattered around it, curled with age. Dana sighed. "We're logging it and moving on. No entering." But that evening at camp, Jonah couldn't stop talking about it. "Who leaves a camera on the table like that?" "You think it still works?" Dana told him to let it go. But the next morning when we woke up, Jonah's tent was empty. His boots were gone. We called his name for an hour before Dana noticed something. His GPS beacon was still blinking near the cabin. We followed the signal. His boot prints led straight to the cabin door. The wire latch had been unwrapped. Inside it looked exactly the same, except for one thing. The Polaroid camera was gone, and on the table were 3 new photographs that hadn't been there before. The first showed the front of the cabin, taken from the same spot Jonah had stood the day before. The second showed the 3 of us, me, Dana, and Jonah, standing by the sign behind the cabin. But none of us had taken that photo. And the third showed the same cabin again, but now there was someone standing in the window. A figure, tall, thin, with no face. We called his name again, but the woods gave no echo. Only a faint click echoed from somewhere deeper inside the trees, like a camera shutter going off. We followed the sound for 50 yards before Dana said, "Stop." She pointed at the snow. There were prints. Boot prints, Jonah's size. They went straight ahead for several yards, then stopped abruptly. But something else started where his ended. Bare footprints, longer than any human's, pressed deep and perfectly straight. They led back toward the cabin. We didn't follow them. That night, Dana radioed it in as a missing person case. The Park Service told us to stay put until the SAR team arrived in the morning. We built a fire and sat silent, the radio hissing in the background. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint sound behind our tents. Click. Like a camera taking a photo. I thought it was my imagination until Dana whispered, "You heard that too, didn't you?" We didn't sleep. At dawn, when the SAR team arrived, we led them back to the site. The first thing they noticed was the camera. It was back on the table, and beside it were 3 new photographs. One showed the search team approaching the cabin. One showed me and Dana standing by the fire the night before. And the third showed Jonah standing behind us smiling. The search and rescue team reached us just after sunrise. 4 people in orange jackets moving with quiet focus. The lead was a veteran ranger named Hale. He shook our hands, asked short questions, and listened more than he talked. We walked them to the cabin. The air felt colder there, like the place held its own weather. Frost clung to the window glass even though sunlight hit the clearing. Hale noticed the camera on the table first. "That yours?" he asked. "No," I said. "It moves." He gave me a look like he wanted to believe me but couldn't. Then he saw the 3 new photos. The ones of the SAR team, of me and Dana by the fire, and the third one of Jonah standing behind us. Smiling Hale didn't smile. He slid the photos into a clear evidence sleeve and labeled it with a pencil. He kept his voice even. "We'll take this step by step." They searched the immediate area. 2 people made a slow circle outward from the cabin, marking a grid with orange tape. 1 stayed near the clearing to log prints and measure distances. Hale stayed with us. "Show me where you last saw him," he said. We took him to the spot where the boot prints ended and the bear prints began. Hale crouched, tracing the shape with a gloved finger. He didn't touch it. "These aren't animal," he said. "Too long, no arch." Toes spread like a hand. He followed the line with his eyes, back toward the cabin. We returned to the table. The camera was an old Polaroid 1-step, the kind that spits out square photos with the white border. It was clean, like it had lived inside and never seen rain. There was a pack of film in it. The little window showed a 5 exposures left. Hale checked the cabin door. The wire latch was hooked but loose. He looked at Dana. "We're going in." "Careful," she said. "We haven't—" "I know." He unhooked the wire and pushed the door open with the back of his knuckles. The inside was dusty. No rot, no animal smell. Just dust and cold. A small wood stove sat in the corner. A bed frame without a mattress. A shelf with 3 mugs and an empty tin can labeled coffee. Against the far wall, a nail board with strings running across it like a web. Dozens of tiny clothespins clipped to the strings, and on those pins, photographs. At first I thought they were all blank from the dust. But when Hale swept his flashlight across them, the images came alive. Little windows to the same valley, same cabin, same trees, but at different times. Summer light, heavy snow, stars. Even fog turning the clearing into a milk-white bowl. Some were faded almost to nothing. Others looked fresh. A few had scratches over faces like someone had tried to erase a person with a knife. Dana stepped closer. "You seeing this?" "Don't touch," Hale said. "Just look, the photos weren't random. They were arranged in rows. Each row showed the cabin from the same angle, as if a picture had been taken from the exact same spot over and over across many years. People appeared and disappeared. Different clothes. Different crews. A man in a 1970s Ranger jacket. A kid with a red beanie. A woman holding a radio like ours. In one row you could see a bare tree become full of leaves, then bare again like the year ran across 5 frames. "Who took these?" I whispered. No one answered. We were all staring at the same thing. A lower row of 5 pictures. The first 4 showed 3 people at the sign. A man, a woman, and a second man behind them. Us. The 4th showed the thing in the window. And the 5th slot, an empty clothespin waiting. Hale turned back toward the table. The Polaroid now showed 4 exposures. He hadn't touched it. None of us had. He pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Hale, copy? We've got environmental hazards and potential evidence of criminal activity. Requesting additional units and a drone, over. Static. Then, copy, ETA 90 minutes. Understood." He looked at us. We wait. We didn't get 90 minutes. The SAR tech working the perimeter stepped into the doorway. "Ranger Hale? You need to see this." We followed him around the cabin to the north wall. He pointed at the logs. There were scratches in the wood. Not random, not animal. Thin, straight lines carved into a square frame the size of a photograph. Inside that frame were dozens of tiny tick marks like someone counting days. The wood around the square was smooth, worn by fingers. Hale touched the frame gently. "A viewfinder," he said. Another tech called from the clearing. He had unfolded a laminated aerial map. "This cabin shouldn't be here," he said. "These GPS coordinates put us inside the old glacier station boundary. But the last map update says the station was decommissioned and removed in 1978. Dana folded her arms tight. She kept staring at the tree with the carved warning. "They live in the pictures." Dana folded her arms tight. She kept staring at the tree with the carved warning. "They live in the pictures." Hale spoke softly. "We're going to do one test. Controlled. Documented." He set the Polaroid on the cabin threshold and aimed it outward at the clearing. He didn't pick it up. He didn't touch the shutter. Everyone back 5 feet. Eyes on my hands, we stepped back. The wind didn't move. The trees didn't creak. Click. The camera fired on its own. A square photo slid out and landed on the wood floor with a soft spit. It lay there gray at first, then blooming with color. The image came in like fog, revealing a shoreline. The photo showed the clearing and the cabin door, just like we were standing there. But there were more people. People who weren't there with us. A line of rangers in old uniforms, a man with a film camera on a tripod, a teenage girl hugging her arms against the cold. The photo caught another detail too. In the cabin doorway, in the exact spot where the camera rested, there was a faint reflection in the glass of the stove. A face with no features stretched too tight looking out. Hale didn't move. He just breathed slow. "Nobody touched that," he said. We didn't. He went back to the board of hanging photographs and studied the bottom row. His light paused on one image and then slid to the next. He leaned closer. "Riley," he said. "Come here, I didn't want to." "I did anyway." He pointed at the third photo in the bottom row. "Tell me who that is." The picture showed the sign behind the cabin. 3 people stood there. The one on the left was me. The one on the right was Dana. And the one in the middle, half-turned, face blurry. "It's Jonah," I said. Hale nodded slowly. "Look at his jacket. It wasn't the one he'd been wearing. It was an old quilted coat patched at the elbows. The zipper tag was a tiny brass leaf. I had seen that coat before. In a photo from the 1970s training binder. A faded class picture of seasonal staff standing by a different building. Back when Glacier Station was still active. How? I started. A shape moved in the window across from us. All of us flinched at the same time. The window glass showed a dim interior reflection. The stove. The shelf, the nailboard, our bodies in the doorway, Kobo. And behind that, like a layer under the glass, a room that wasn't ours. Yellow light, a coat on a peg, a shadow moving. The shadow stopped, turned, and for a second there was a pale blank oval where a face should be. Dana grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "We're leaving, Riley." Hale raised a hand. "Slow, no running. Back out, stay on my voice." We stepped into the clearing. The air felt thicker, like we were underwater. The Polaroid on the threshold now showed 3 exposures left. One of the SAR techs whispered, "Ranger?" The grid flags, we turned. The orange tape they'd placed in a neat grid had shifted. It wasn't in a square anymore. It formed a rectangle the size of a giant photo frame, laid flat over the moss and needles. Inside that rectangle, the ground looked darker, as if the light there was being eaten. Hale didn't look away from the cabin. "Do not step inside that," he said. "Nobody breaks the plane." We heard it again, click. Not from the threshold camera. From the trees, the sound came from different directions now. Left, then right, then somewhere behind us. Little shutters in the brush. A shape in the corner of my eye, tall and still, just outside the edge of my focus. I didn't look directly at it. Every hair on my arms lifted. Dana's voice was steady but tight. "Hale, we need to go." He nodded. "We're pulling back to the ridge." We'll mark this as a hazard site and wait for the drone team. We started to move. That was when the door of the cabin swung a few inches wider on its own. A new photo slid out across the floor and drifted onto the threshold like a dead leaf. It developed fast, as if it already knew what it wanted to show. It was a picture of the clearing. Empty. No people, no grid flags, no footprints. Just the cabin and the sign and the bare, patient trees. "Riley," Dana said. I looked down at my boots. There were no prints where I was standing. The ground under me looked smooth, untouched. I took one step backward, and the cabin door opened all the way. From the darkness inside, something raised an old flash unit, the metal kind that pops like lightning. "Don't," Hale said. Flash. White light swallowed the doorway and the clearing for a heartbeat. When my vision cleared, the Polaroid counter read 2, and Dana was gone. For a full 3 seconds, none of us spoke. The flash still burned behind my eyes like a second sun. When the light faded, the doorway was empty, and so was the space where Dana had stood. "Dana?" I called. My own voice sounded wrong, flattened, like the air had gone thick. Hale grabbed my jacket. "Do not move." He swept the beam of his flashlight over the clearing. The light caught our gear, the grid flags, the moss. Everything looked normal again. No footprints showed where Dana had been. The ground looked untouched, the same way the photograph had shown it moments before. "She's not gone," I said. She isn't here," Hale cut in. "We back off. Right now." We began moving toward the ridge, slow, one careful step at a time. Behind us, the cabin door hung open. Inside, it was black. I could still see the faint glow of the Polaroid counter through the darkness. 2 left. Then I heard it. The click of another shutter far away, followed by a soft fluttering. Like paper sliding off a table, a new photo drifted across the clearing, catching a glint of light as it fell. It landed face up near my boot. Hale reached for it with a stick, flipped it over, and froze. It was Dana, standing in the cabin doorway, smiling, both hands folded in front of her like she was posing for a school picture. Behind her, through the window, was me, but I was still out here. Same jacket, same stance, camera strap around my neck that I didn't own. Hale slipped the photo into a sleeve, sealing it shut. "We're done. Move." We made it a quarter mile up the trail before the radio finally cracked to life. The drone team was 5 minutes out. Hale told them to stay in visual range and not to descend into the clearing. He didn't say why. When they arrived, 2 operators launched a small quad from the ridge. The live feed showed the valley in perfect detail. Trees, snow patches, the thin gray line of the cabin roof. The cabin door was closed again. The Polaroid on the threshold was gone. Then one operator leaned closer to the monitor. "You seeing that shimmer?" he said. On the screen, the clearing seemed to bend slightly, like heat rising off asphalt. Every few seconds, the image rippled. Within the ripples, faint white rectangles appeared and disappeared. Shapes the size of photographs hovering in the air and then folding flat again. Hale ordered the drone pulled back. The image cleared as soon as it left the boundary of the clearing. They marked the coordinates and logged the footage. By the time we packed up camp, the valley had swallowed the cabin in mist. 3 days later, the photos were analyzed in the regional office. They confirmed the timestamps. The ones showing the SAR team, me, and Dana were taken after Jonah's disappearance, by a camera that had no power source logged. The final photo, the one of Dana in the doorway, had a creation time of 06:14 a.m., 21 minutes after she vanished. The lab tech slid the image under a magnifier. "There's something in the background," he said. Behind Dana, through the cabin's back window, stood another person. Tall, thin, shoulders too narrow, head tilted slightly left. The figure's hands were lifted, like it was holding an invisible frame. They enhanced the reflection in the stove glass. Faint outlines of hundreds of small rectangles behind the figure, stacked like a wall of photographs. That was when Hale shut the monitor off. "Enough," he said. The official report listed it as a visual and spatial anomaly, pending geological assessment. The case files for Jonah Lee and Dana Crawford were transferred to missing persons. Both remain open. 2 weeks later, I went back on my own. I told myself it was closure, that maybe I could spot something the others missed. But truthfully, I just needed to know the cabin was real. I reached the ridge at dusk. No fog this time, no snow, just quiet. The clearing below looked empty. I hiked down anyway. Where the cabin had been was only grass and low brush, new growth less than a season old. No foundation, no nails, no sign a building had ever stood there. I almost convinced myself it had all been stress, exhaustion, shared hysteria, until I saw the tree. The old warning sign was still nailed there. The letters were nearly gone, but I could still read them. They live in the pictures. Below the sign, nailed freshly into the bark, hung a single Polaroid photo. It showed the clearing, empty again, except for one figure standing where I was standing, facing the tree, head slightly bent. The face was blurred by motion. My motion? Someone had taken the picture before I arrived. I didn't stay. I hiked out without stopping, reached the trailhead long after dark, and didn't look back once. A month later, Hale called. His voice was quiet. "Riley, you're not going to like this," he said. He'd been reviewing the digital backups for chain of custody. One image file had changed on its own date stamp. The last photo, the one of Dana in the doorway. When he opened it, she wasn't alone anymore. A second shape stood behind her, hand resting on her shoulder. The hand was mine. He deleted the file. Or tried to. The folder regenerated within seconds. The photo back in place. He asked if I wanted to know what the new counter number on the recovered camera read when evidence logged it last week. I said no. He told me anyway. Left. My name's Mark Ellison, and I used to be a sonar technician for the U.S. Geological Survey. That sounds fancy, but most days it was just me, a laptop, and a humming metal raft floating on cold water somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. We mapped lakes, measuring depth, water pressure, sediment buildup. Quiet work, boring work, until Lake Crescent. It sits deep inside Olympic National Park, over 600 feet down at the center. The water is so clear they say you can read a newspaper 30 feet below the surface. Cold, still, no algae, no decay. Locals call it the Glass Lake. It's also known for one thing: bodies don't float there. Something in the chemistry preserves them, turns them waxy, heavy, and keeps them below. That never bothered me before last spring. We were there to test a new subsonic mapping system, basically underwater radar. It sends out low-frequency pulses and translates the echo into 3D topography. We were logging a grid about a mile offshore when we noticed the feedback pattern starting to distort. Usually sonar comes back as smooth blue shapes, lake bottom, ridges, maybe debris. But halfway through the scan, the screen started showing vertical returns. Could be thermal interference, my partner Jan said. She adjusted the gain, recalibrated, and ran it again. Same result. The echo came back cleaner, sharper. There was something standing upright on the lake floor. At first I thought it was a tree stump. Then a second shape appeared. Then 3 more, all evenly spaced. Each about 6 feet tall. Old bridge pilings? I suggested. Jan shook her head. No bridges here. We marked the coordinates and ran another sweep. This time a faint signal tone bled through our speaker system. A soft hum beneath the sonar ping. Low. Steady. Almost like someone was humming under the water. Jan frowned. That's not possible. There's no transmitter on that channel. She cut the audio. The tone kept going. I remember leaning close to the speaker, thinking it had to be mechanical feedback. But the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't random. It had rhythm. 4 seconds on, 3 seconds off, repeat. When I filtered it through the laptop's analyzer, a faint waveform appeared, like a voice caught underwater. Could be electromagnetic bleed, Jan said. but her voice shook.
Old mining cables, maybe? Except there are no mines under Lake Crescent.
There never were. We logged the reading and moved on. But the tone followed us. Every grid line we mapped, every new coordinate. Same pitch, same rhythm. 4 seconds on, 3 seconds off. By the time we docked at the small ranger station, the hum was still echoing in my head like tinnitus. We downloaded the data that night. The sonar feed was clean. The depth logs were fine. But when Jan opened the audio file, it didn't start with the tone. It started with voices. Faint, garbled, like an old radio transmission. A man whispering something that sounded like coordinates, then silence. Then that hum again. Low, slow, and pulsing. Could be old emergency frequency bounce, I said, trying to keep my tone casual. Maybe the hydro station upstream left something open. Jan zoomed in on the waveform. It's not radio, Mark, it's seismic. It's coming from inside the lake. We listened again. Under the hum there was something else, soft, deliberate. Like breathing. The next morning we went out again. The ranger on duty, an older guy named Phil, asked if we were the ones who'd been running sonar at midnight. No, I said. We left the raft locked up. He scratched his beard. Well, someone didn't. Lights were on out there till 2. Thought maybe you'd drop something. We hadn't. When we reached the raft, our laptop was still on. Screen glowing faint blue. The power light on the sonar unit pulsed steady, though the system was off. The speaker emitted a thin buzz and the same hum, quieter now, almost polite. Jan looked pale. How is it still running? It's not, I said. Battery's dead. The screen flashed once, then went black. I lifted the unit cover and froze. Inside, the surface was wet, not with condensation, but with droplets of clear water beating along the metal like it had been submerged. We hadn't used it since the previous night. When I wiped it off, my hand came away cold. Colder than the air, colder than ice. We checked the depth log. It showed one final entry made at 2:14 a.m. Neither of us had been out there at that time. The coordinates were the same as before, the cluster of upright shapes on the lake floor. Except now there was one more, and the data tag attached to it read ID 5, human form detected. Jan stared at the screen. You think it's a diver? Too deep, I said. No one goes past 300 here. She zoomed in on the model. The figure was upright, tilted slightly forward, arms at its sides. The sonar had caught a reflection where a face should be, a hollow oval darker than anything else around it. We tried running a second scan. The machine refused to start. The battery meter read 0. Phil met us at the dock again when we came back. Everything okay? He asked. Equipment glitch, Jan said quickly. We'll fix it. Phil nodded, but as we walked past, he added, Strange you'd mention a hum. Locals say there's always one before something drowns here. He laughed after he said it, but it didn't sound like a joke. That night, when I lay in the small park bunkhouse, I kept hearing that hum in my head. 4 seconds on, 3 seconds off, like a slow heartbeat trying to surface. And sometime after midnight, I woke to the faint sound of bubbling water outside my window. Lake Crescent was 2 miles away. I didn't tell anyone about the bubbling I heard that night. Maybe it was groundwater, I told myself. Or a pipe, anything normal. But by morning, Jan was waiting outside the bunkhouse, pale and tight-lipped. Mark, she said quietly. Come see this. She had gone through the sonar laptop again. The last entry, the one marked ID 5, human form detected, now had an audio attachment. That was impossible. Our sonar didn't record sound with depth logs. We clicked play. At first it was only static and that same low hum. Then a soft knocking started, slow and rhythmic, like someone tapping from inside metal. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Then a voice, thin, muffled, almost mechanical, whispered, Down here. Jan slammed the lid shut. We just sat there for a full minute, staring at the aluminum table, pretending we hadn't heard it. Finally, she said, We need to report this. I nodded. The park ranger Phil listened without laughing. That was worse. He rubbed the side of his beard and said, "You're not the first to pick up sounds out there. Every few years, research teams swear they hear something. Most don't come back after they dive." I asked if he was serious. He just said, "Be careful which stories you test." That afternoon, headquarters approved a follow-up dive. Not because of the voice, but because our sonar might have located a preserved body. Lake Crescent has a long history of missing persons. The Lady of the Lake, the 1940s murder victim they pulled out looking like wax, still makes it into guidebooks. They assigned us 2 park divers, both ex-Navy. They brought a portable cable camera, a small titanium capsule on 1,000 feet of fiber. No humans would go down. The lake is too cold and deep. We launched from the same raft at 10 a.m. The water was so still it looked like polished glass. As the camera dropped, the sunlight faded fast, green, then gray, then black. At 400 feet, the pressure gauge started to tick slower than normal, like time itself was dragging. Jan sat beside me watching the feed. "There," she said suddenly. The screen showed the upright shapes again, standing in a gentle slope of silt. 5 of them. Then, as the camera panned, we saw the 6th, the one our system had added overnight. It looked like a man caught mid-step. One arm forward, the other bent back. His outline shimmered faintly, the way heat does above pavement. The silt around his feet was undisturbed. "Could be gas pockets causing refraction," the dive leader said. Except the shape's head turned, just a few degrees, following the camera. Jan gasped. "Did you see that?" "Replay frame," I said. We scrubbed backward. Frame by frame. At frame 212, its head faced forward. At frame 213, the head had shifted to the right, eyes level with the lens. Frame 214 gone. Nothing but drifting silt. The diver cursed under his breath. "Cable's fine. Feed's fine. That's not a glitch." We steadied the camera and kept lowering. The hum returned through the audio feed. Low, soft, steady. 4 seconds on. 3 off. Then faintly under the tone came breathing again. I leaned toward the mic. "If there's anyone down there, give us a sign." For a moment, nothing. Then the depth gauge froze, stuck at 615 feet, and the hum cut out completely. Static hissed. Out of the noise came the same whisper as before. "It's open." The video feed flared white like a flashbulb underwater. When the picture cleared, all 6 figures were gone. The lake floor was smooth as slate. "Reel it up," I said quickly, but the winch didn't respond. The cable counter kept counting down. 620 feet, 630, 640. The diver hit the emergency reel. The motor whined but didn't move. Something down there was pulling the line. The camera shook violently, jerks, then a long drag sideways. The feed showed only darkness and a streak of silt. Then a shape slid past the lens, something pale and moving fast. I thought it was a fish until the image steadied for half a second. It was a hand. 5 fingers. Skin gray and smooth like wax pressed flat against the lens. The palm left a wet print before sliding away. "Kill power," I yelled. The diver slammed the cutoff. The monitor went black. We hauled the cable by hand for the next hour. When the camera finally surfaced, it was dripping with water far colder than the lake's average temperature. The metal housing was dented inward like something had squeezed it. Inside the lens cover, we found silt and 1 human tooth. Phil met us at the dock. He didn't ask questions. He just stared at the tooth in the evidence bag and muttered, "It always gives something back." That night, Jan couldn't sleep. She kept saying she could still hear the hum through the walls, through the floorboards. At one point, she pressed her ear to the sink drain and whispered, "It's louder here." I tried to laugh it off. But when I turned on the faucet, the water came out pulsing. 4 seconds on. 3 off. We left the next morning. Headquarters filed our report as equipment malfunction and acoustic anomaly. They told us to get rest, maybe see a counselor. Jan said she wasn't coming back to the field. I told her I understood. But 2 nights later, she called me from her home in Seattle. Her voice was trembling. "Mark, I still hear it," she said. "It's in the pipes. The same rhythm. I think it's—" The call dropped into static. Then faintly the line carried that same underwater hum. 4 seconds on. 3 seconds off, and then a single word whispered close to the receiver. "Surface." 2 days after Jan's call, I got a visit from park authorities. They said she'd gone missing. Her neighbors had heard running water in her apartment around 3 a.m. Taps, shower, even the bathtub, all on at once. By sunrise, her door was still locked from the inside. When police entered, the place was flooded ankle deep. Every faucet was still open. Jan wasn't there. Her phone was found on the kitchen counter, screen cracked, last call, me. Duration: 3 minutes 47 seconds. The audio log had corrupted, except for one clear band of sound that Tex isolated later. A low hum. 4 seconds on, 3 off, and a faint voice whispering, "It's open." I flew back to Olympic the same day. The lake looked the same. Calm, clean, mirror flat, under a gray sky. No one would have believed what was underneath that silence. The Park Service had ordered a second investigation, but only to recover equipment and resolve public concern. No one wanted to talk about Jan. Her disappearance had already been labeled off-duty personal matter. They assigned me to assist a new dive team, 4 specialists from NOAA, top-grade submersibles, sonar drones, and a tethered capsule that could go below 800 feet. The lead diver, Commander Halverson, asked what really happened during our last run. I told him what I'd seen. He stared for a long time, then said, "If the data's real, it isn't geological. It's biological, or worse. We launched at dawn. The water was colder than before, barely 39 degrees at the surface. Within minutes, fog rolled in so thick it erased the shoreline. The sonar drone descended first. At 400 feet, the feed was steady, nothing unusual. At 500, the static began. At 600, the hum came back. Even Halverson's men went silent. The tone was clear through every headset, vibrating like pressure inside the skull. 4 seconds on, 3 off. "Mark," one of them said over comms, It's broadcasting a pattern." I watched the waveform on the laptop screen. The peaks weren't random, they formed coordinates. The same point Jan and I had logged the week before. "Bring up visual feed," Halverson ordered. The camera light pierced through black water. Silt swirled around like dust in an endless hallway. Then came the shapes again. But there weren't 6 anymore. There were 7. 7 upright figures standing motionless on the lake floor, arranged in a circle. The 7th was new and smaller than the rest. The diver whispered, "That's not a log." He moved closer. The video sharpened. The figure was wearing a dive suit. I felt my chest tighten. "Pull back, that's enough." Halverson didn't answer. He was staring at the monitor. The suit was standard park-issued gear, the same kind Jan had used. Except the helmet was cracked from the inside and the visor was black. When the light hit it, a pale reflection flashed across the glass. A face that wasn't hers. It was smooth, featureless, like wax stretched thin. The diver started breathing fast. "Something's behind her. Movement at 7 o'clock. The camera spun. For a second I saw the lake bed open, silt rising as if something had exhaled from below. Then the hum grew louder, vibrating through every piece of metal on the raft. The diver screamed something we couldn't understand. Then the feed went white. All screens froze. All systems dead. The last sound through the comms wasn't a scream, it was a single knock, echoing like metal struck from underneath the hull, then silence. When we finally hauled the capsule up, it was intact, but the diver wasn't inside. His tether had been cut clean, like with a blade. No blood, no tears, no sign of struggle. The inside of the capsule was dry, but on the glass viewport, drawn in condensation, were finger marks spelling one word: surface. We shut everything down and left the site. Halverson said he'd classify the report as Sonar interference event. I knew that meant buried, locked in archives no one reads. That night, I stayed alone at the ranger station. Sleep didn't come. At 2:47 a.m., the emergency radio crackled to life. Through the static came the same low hum. Then Jan's voice, calm, quiet, almost peaceful. "Mark," she said, "it's not a place. It's a door. And it's still open." The line cut. The hum kept playing. 4 seconds on. 3 off. 3 months later, Lake Crescent was closed to the public after an unexplained drop in water temperature killed every fish within 2 miles. The official reason? Chemical imbalance due to rockslide sediment. Locals knew better. They said the lake was breathing again. I quit the survey after that. Moved inland, sold my equipment. But sometimes when the power goes out and the house gets too quiet, I swear I can still hear that same pulse. 4 seconds on. 3 off. And once, just once, I recorded it. I played the audio backward. It wasn't a hum at all. It was a voice repeating the same phrase over and over, deep and distant. "Let us surface." My name is Evan Pierce, and for almost 5 years I worked as a field technician for the National Weather Service. My job was to maintain remote climate sensors scattered through the Olympic Peninsula. Rain gauges, anemometers, and small automatic weather stations. Most were solar-powered boxes that quietly collected data and sent hourly reports back to Seattle through satellite link. I loved the solitude. Most people can't handle days of silence broken only by wind and rain. But for me, that quiet felt like home. In November of 2016, I was assigned to service an old station at Quileute Ridge, about 10 miles inland from the coast. It hadn't sent a signal for 6 weeks. Unusual, since it was one of the most reliable stations in our system. The last data packet it transmitted had a single note attached in the comment field. Manual override active. That made no sense. No one had manual access to these units except technicians, and I was the only one assigned to that area. The trail to the ridge was overgrown and half washed out by rain. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. No birds, no insects. Just the dull hiss of wind through the trees. When I reached the clearing, the weather station stood exactly where it should have been. A metal tower with solar panels, a small aluminum shelter at the base, and a short antenna poking toward the gray sky. But the door to the shelter was open. Inside, everything was neat, too neat, like someone had cleaned it recently. The batteries were fully charged, the solar regulators spotless. It looked like a lab exhibit. Not a piece of equipment left in the rain for 5 years. The data terminal was powered on. The small screen glowed faint green, displaying one single message. Transmission resumed, waiting for acknowledgement. I radioed headquarters, but static swallowed the signal. The satellite phone read "no connection." I tapped the console. The display flickered once, then began printing data automatically. Temperature, 40 Fahrenheit hours, wind speed, 0 mph, humidity, 100%, barometric pressure. Then a new line appeared. Visual monitoring, active. I froze. Our weather stations don't have cameras. I opened the terminal casing to check for modifications. Inside, everything looked standard, until I saw a small black cable running beneath the circuit board. It led down through the metal floor into the ground. I followed it outside and found a narrow trench behind the shelter, maybe 3 feet long, recently dug and refilled. The soil was fresh and darker than the rest, like it had been disturbed days ago. I started digging with my hands. About a foot down, my fingers hit glass. I brushed away the dirt and uncovered a camera lens the size of a quarter, embedded in a thin steel plate. The cable from the terminal fed directly into it. Someone had buried a live camera under the station. I hurried back inside. The console had started beeping. New data received. On the screen, a small image window had appeared, a live feed in grainy black and white. It showed the clearing outside the station, framed perfectly from ground level. I could see my own boots in the corner of the frame, then a line of text printed below the image. Identity confirmed. Technician Pierce. My chest went cold. No one should have been able to access my personnel ID out here. I backed toward the door. Before I could step out, the screen changed again. Do not leave. The console beeped 3 times, then went dark. Outside, the forest felt heavier somehow, like the air itself had thickened. I decided to pack up and head back to the truck. But when I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard a faint click behind me, the sound of a camera shutter. I turned. The tower was still, but the small red light beneath the solar panel was blinking now. A few seconds later, another click, this time from somewhere deeper in the woods. Then another closer, and another, like a dozen cameras all taking photos at once. I called out, "Is anyone there?" Only the wind answered, slow, steady, like breathing through the trees. When I checked my watch, the minute hand was spinning backward. Not fast, just slowly ticking in reverse, 1 minute at a time. That was when I heard the transmission. The emergency channel on my radio cracked alive on its own. "Pierce, come in." It wasn't headquarters. The voice was dry, metallic, dragging each word. I answered, "This is Pierce." "Who is this?" Silence for a moment. Then the voice repeated slower. "Pierce, do not reset the station. It is watching." "Who's watching?" I asked. The radio hissed, then a faint scratching came through, like fingernails on glass. Finally, the voice said something I'll never forget. "You already turned it on." The connection died. My radio display read a frequency that shouldn't exist. 6666 Notormardies. When I turned back toward the tower, the screen inside the shelter was glowing again, brighter this time, pulsing like a heartbeat. Lines of code scrolled across faster than I could read. Between them, I saw phrases that made no sense. Surface monitoring engaged. Sequence aligned. Awaiting next subject. My own name flashed on the screen again. Then a new line appeared, one word repeated 3 times, "Stay, stay, stay." And in the bottom right corner, a faint live feed showed a figure walking through the trees toward the shelter. Me, except I was standing still. For a long time I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at that little monitor inside the weather shelter, at the live feed that showed me walking toward it. But I wasn't moving. Outside, my boots were rooted to the mud. Inside the screen, my reflection, or whatever it was, kept taking slow, deliberate steps until it reached the door. The camera feed flickered once. Then it went black. I backed away from the shelter and tried my radio again. Nothing but soft static. The fog around the ridge had thickened into a solid wall, so dense I couldn't even see the tree line. I told myself I'd just gotten turned around. I'd walk the trail back to the truck, check my GPS, and file the report in the morning. But when I opened my handheld GPS unit, the display showed no coordinates, just a blank gray map and the words "signal repeating." Every time I tried to move east, the compass needle rotated back toward the station. It felt like the forest didn't want me to leave. After maybe 20 minutes of hiking, I reached a small ridge that looked familiar. The trail curved down and then up again. But as I climbed the next rise, I froze. The weather station stood directly ahead of me. Same tower, same shelter, same blinking red light. I had been walking in a perfect circle. I laughed at first, trying to convince myself I'd just looped back by mistake. But the tracks in the mud told another story. They weren't circling the clearing. They were all leading toward the tower, every single set of prints. Like dozens of people had walked there before and vanished inside the same patch of earth. That's when I noticed the smell. Not decay, not damp wood. It was electrical, like burnt copper and ozone after a lightning strike. The metal door to the shelter was open again, though I was sure I'd closed it. The screen glowed faintly inside. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer. The console now displayed a new window. Data uplink complete. Broadcasting repeater ID. Target, Technician Pierce. Below that, a small audio bar pulsed with a heartbeat-like rhythm. Then I heard my own voice play through the speaker. "This is Pierce. Quileute Ridge Station. Manual override activated." It was my initial field report, the one I'd sent before the radio went dead. But the timing was wrong. It was repeating the message in a loop over and over with small differences each time. On one replay, my tone cracked slightly mid-sentence. On the next, my breathing grew heavier. By the fifth loop, my voice had changed completely. Slower, deeper, tired, almost like I'd been out there for weeks. I stepped back, shaking. The radio on my vest crackled suddenly and replayed the same phrase, but delayed by half a second. As if something was mimicking me from the other side of the frequency. A low hum rolled through the air then, like distant thunder beneath the ground. The tower began to vibrate. Dust fell from the metal joints above me. I ran outside, but the fog had closed in tighter. The trees were no longer clear shapes, were just dark vertical shadows. Then the hum stopped, and a new sound replaced it. Whispering. It came from everywhere, the woods, the soil, the tower itself. At first it sounded like radio static in the wind. Then faint words formed between the noise, not signal. Memory. Not storm. Mirror. He sees what stays. I covered my ears, but the voices kept threading through the gaps, vibrating in my skull. I grabbed my pack, sprinted into the fog, and kept moving downhill, hoping to hit the main road. After 10 minutes of blind running, I finally saw light through the trees, the metallic gleam of headlights. Relief hit me hard. I stumbled forward, waving my arms, but when I broke through the tree line, my breath caught. It wasn't my truck. It was the same weather station again. The tower's red light blinked steadily, washing the fog in crimson pulses. Only now there were 2 shelters at its base. The second one was smaller, newer, like it had been built overnight, and its door was slightly open. I stood there, shaking, trying to understand. The second shelter had my field number etched into the panel. Unit 12P. The same number printed on the tag of my work jacket. Inside, everything was arranged like a copy of the first room. Same table, same terminal, same smell of cold metal. But the computer screen displayed a live image of me standing outside, frozen exactly as I was. I stepped back, testing it. The reflection moved perfectly, no delay. Then I blinked, and my image didn't. It just kept staring, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A new line appeared across the bottom of the screen. Weather anomaly stable. Awaiting second technician. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, crunching through wet soil, slow and steady. I turned and saw a silhouette walking through the fog. It was my shape. Same jacket, same hat. Only its face was pale and still, like wax pulled too tight over a skull. The thing stopped about 10 feet away and tilted its head, exactly the way my reflection had done earlier. Then it said, in my own voice, "Station complete. Return inside." I ran. I don't remember how long I ran for. The fog never thinned and every direction felt the same. When my flashlight finally died, I fell against a fallen tree, gasping, covered in mud. Somewhere far behind, the hum began again. Steady, rhythmic, endless. And over the radio, my voice whispered one more time. Surface monitoring engaged. Repeater activated, then silence. They found my truck 2 days later. Keys in the ignition, headlights still on, one tire sunk halfway into the mud. The trail leading away from it showed only a single set of footprints, mine heading toward Quileute Ridge. None coming back. I don't remember leaving the ridge. When the rescue team reached me, I was sitting beside a dry creek bed 8 miles west, wrapped in my own field jacket but barefoot. They said I was murmuring something on repeat, a broken line of radio code. Signal repeating. Signal repeating, I don't recall saying it. What I do remember is the sound. Low, steady, pulsing like a heartbeat in the earth. Even now, sometimes when the world gets quiet enough, I can feel it under my ribs. After I was discharged from the hospital, the Park Service asked for a full report. I told them about the tower, the buried camera, the second shelter, the voice that sounded like me. They nodded, wrote notes, and thanked me for my time. A week later, I checked the public station map. Quileute Ridge had been deleted, but the coordinates still existed on the internal network twice. Two identical listings, both marked active, both transmitting the same frequency. The note beside each read simply, "Repeater 12PI emailed the supervisor." He said there was no record of a repeater unit ever being installed in that region, but he'd look into it. The next morning, his contact page was blank. 3 months later, I decided to go back. Not to the ridge itself, just close enough to prove to myself that it was gone. I followed the same dirt road, stopping at the fork where the forest began. The air was still damp with pine and salt. Everything looked normal until my radio flicked on by itself. "Technician Pierce, station ready. Please confirm." It was my voice, same tone, same tiny pause between words. I switched the unit off. It turned itself back on. Manual override active. Then a faint click echoed through the trees, the sound of a camera shutter. I drove away fast. But when I checked the rearview mirror, a red light flashed once from deep inside the woods, blinking slow, steady, like the heartbeat of a machine that refuses to die. Weeks passed. I tried to forget. I changed jobs, moved inland. No more field work. But strange things followed. One night, my home weather radio crackled awake at 3:14 a.m. The screen displayed a location code, QR12P. The feed repeated temperature, wind speed, humidity, all perfect numbers, no decimals. Then a new line scrolled across. Visual monitoring online. Identity confirmed Pierce. I unplugged the radio, pulled the batteries, even threw it in the trash. The next morning, the unit was back on the shelf, clean and dry. Cable neatly coiled, still turned on. 2 weeks later, a federal recovery crew was sent to dismantle the Quileute Ridge station. They expected to find one structure. Instead, they found two, standing side by side on the same coordinates. Same ID numbers, same serial plates, both broadcasting identical data streams. The strangest part? Neither tower cast a shadow, even in full daylight. The team logged 15 minutes of footage before every camera failed. When they reviewed the surviving frames, one of the engineers noticed something in the reflection of a panel. A figure standing between the towers, head tilted, watching them. When they enhanced the image, the man's face was pale, expressionless. His badge read E. Pierce. A month later, one of those engineers, Mara Kell, called me at home. Her voice shook. She said the replacement station they'd built to cover that area kept transmitting a second audio layer under the weather data. A faint hum, 4 seconds on, 3 off. And if you slowed it down, there was something hidden in it. A whisper repeating the same phrase again and again. "Do not reset the station." That night, I left my porch light on and didn't sleep. Now, years later, I live more than 200 miles away. But my new digital weather sensor, cheap, store-bought, sometimes changes its display on windless nights. It flashes the same 3 words I saw that first day. Stay, stay, stay. Once, during a thunderstorm, the screen briefly showed a live feed of a forest clearing. I could see rain falling through fog and a metal tower blinking red in the distance. Lightning hit and the image vanished. But the next morning on my front porch, there was a small weather tag lying in the rain. Etched into it were 3 letters and 2 numbers. 12P. Some nights when the power hums through the walls and the house feels too still, I can almost hear it. The pulse beneath the silence. If I hold my breath long enough, the rhythm falls into place. 4 seconds on, 3 off, and just before the sound fades, a voice whispers through the static, soft and certain. Manual override confirmed. Weather station online. Welcome back, Technician Pierce.